Good evening. I'd like to talk with you a little bit tonight about Christian jargon. Uh, many people and places and professions have jargon that they use, and it can be very confusing for those outside of the franchise. Uh, when you order a coffee, if you're in New York City and you want to grab a coffee to go, you run into the diner and you say, "I'll take a regular coffee, please." What do they give you? They give you a takeaway cup and they put some coffee in it, and they also add cream and sugar. And it's a certain amount of cream and it's a certain amount of sugar, which is considered a regular coffee. Uh, but the lingo is different if you live in Texas. I lived in Texas for a while, and if you ask for a regular coffee in Texas, they will give you black coffee. That's regular. Coffee as it comes out of the pot. And the coffee in Texas doesn't need cream and sugar because, sorry, Texas, the coffee there is very, very bland and weak, unless you're drinking it at the campfire with the cowboys, in which case it can take on a little more boldness. Well, if you don't know what regular means at the coffee shop in New York or at the coffee shop in Texas, you may get something that you hadn't wanted, or you may not get something that you had hoped for. And so it's important in coffee shops and other places to know what your words mean. I'd like to talk about a word that you will sometimes hear if you are studying the Bible. And let me start out with this. This is a book called the Synopsis Quator Evangeliorum. Yeah. Now you might notice that last word looks a little bit like our word evangelist. Now, that book is not about evangelists. It is a synopsis of the four Gospels. And what it actually does is it takes Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it puts each of the four Gospels in different columns, and you can follow the story of Jesus through all four Gospels and see where Matthew maybe includes something that Luke leaves out. Matthew, for example, tells us about the Magi, and Luke doesn't. But Luke tells us about the visit of the shepherds, which Matthew doesn't. And Mark really has no Christmas to speak of at all. And John's Christmas story can basically be boiled down to one sentence: the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And that's a very different kind of a Christmas story than Matthew or Luke gives us, but it's a little bit better than what Mark does, which is practically nothing. Well, the last word is what I want to focus on, evangeliorium. It means, if we were writing this in English, it would be gospel or gospels, a synopsis of the four Gospels. And so our word evangelist comes directly from this Greek word, by the way, with the Latins also borrowed with a little bit of adjustment. Why are these called the evangeliorium? And what exactly is a gospel anyway? Well, in Greek, the word gospel is evangelio, and it means good news. Good news. And that might be a surprise to some, because the word gospel, while you might know, most people I think would know that the gospels are the stories of Jesus, but they might not know that gospel means good news. And that's because uh, our word gospel has been uh, is archaic. It comes from two words. It comes from good, put together with spell, and kind of squeezed together. And so you lose the D, and you're left with go and spell. And well, the only time we think of a spell is when we think of witches. And what do witches have to do with the good news? Um, well, but what is a witch's spell? A spell is words very carefully arranged to accomplish something, maybe to cure a wart, or to cause somebody to trip on their way to work or something, whatever witches' spells are supposed to accomplish. But this is good spell, or good spelling. Uh, it's an arrangement of words that is designed to convey something good, good tidings, good, good, good words, good news. Now, what that implies is that the Gospels are about something that happened. News is different than a myth or a fairy tale. The good news of Jesus is a story about something that really happened. So, uh, an evangelist, properly speaking, is not someone ripping off old ladies on television for their life savings, but an evangelist is a gospeler, a good speller, a bringer, a bearer of good news, but not just any old good news, the good news about Jesus Christ. And so now, those of you that are Christians and that are familiar with Christianese, I have to warn you about something, because a lot of times we will talk about the Gospel of John, or the Gospel of Matthew, or the Gospel of Mark, or the Gospel of Luke. And that is not really a proper description. A better way to say that would be that this is the good news of Jesus Christ, according to St. Matthew. This is the good news about Jesus Christ, according to St. Luke. This is the good news of Jesus Christ, according to St. John. And John had a very good angle on the good news. Why? Because do you remember that when Jesus was dying on the cross, below the cross was his mother, Mary. And the only disciple that we know was right there was John. And Jesus looked at John and Mary, and he said to John, "Behold your mother." And he said to Mary, "Behold your son." And from that time, John took Mary into his home, and she stayed with him. And wow, what stories she must have told. John had a very good selection, I reckon, to choose from when he chose to put his good news stories together. And in fact, John includes many stories that none of the other gospel writers include. He leaves out a lot of stories that none of the others put in. And but when you hear about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Uh, some people think that they were all apostles. They are not all apostles. Now, all of them are believed to be telling the stories that the apostles passed down, but only John and Matthew were actually apostles, traditionally speaking. Um, but they were all called evangelists. And so when you read about the evangelist wrote this or the evangelist wrote that, they're talking about these men who wrote down the good news about Jesus Christ. And they were enthusiastic about it because the good news about Jesus Christ was news that had changed their lives, that had marked their minds and their hearts indelibly. And they were very keen to share them with others. And so they were highly motivated to share the good news that had so impacted them with others. So let me just give you a summary then. The four Gospels are four different versions of the good news about Jesus Christ, about what he said, what he did, what was said about him, how he was perceived, how he was treated, and ultimately about the salvation that he brought. The Gospels were written by men called evangelists because they were the bearers of the good tidings of Jesus Christ. And so an evangelist is not necessarily a chap with a funny hairdo, and he should never be someone who is trying to rip others off. But an evangelist, properly speaking these days, should be someone who is sharing the good news about Jesus Christ with others so that they may discover the blessings that Jesus came to bestow upon humanity. Hope that's been helpful. Put your comments in or your questions, and I look forward to receiving those. Until the next talk, God bless you.